But you were in Kensington, and you ran a salon there. You and your husband had poetry readings. It was just beautiful that in the heart of Kensington there was this salon with music, with poetry, with people who write books. And speaking of us going back, I knew you as a force at the Washington Women's Art Center, very active in the feminist group, and you were in a show with me at the Art Barn, and there was an outcry about your work. You did big sculpture-like objects, didn't you?
I did.
And what was the outcry about?
I actually,
at the Art Barn.
To go back to that time, I had just come out a couple of years before that of a graduate program that was a self-directed graduate program. My goal was to map my psyche.
Oh,
in other words, to map my psyche. And I did work that was very inward and archetypal and Jungian, etc. And I continued to do that. I moved from Boston to Washington. I continued to do that work. The work that I put at the Art Barn looked like large, I call them bone bodies. They were based on bones, but they looked like bodies. And they also looked disturbing to people. The one particular, I think, that they censored a couple of these at the Art Barn. One was called The Sacrifice. It scared some people. They thought it was going to scare kids, but did not scare children at all.
Saying, don't scare the children.
The children love it.
To light in things like
They love it. So it scared the adults a little bit. And so some of those pieces were censored. They asked me to not show those pieces.
I always think of Nancy Heller gives lectures. She gave one at the Corcoran about censorship. And she starts with 1200 something, where Veronese was told to take the animals out of the Last Supper. And what he did was change the title to The Banquet, because they said it was offensive to see a religious scene with animals in it. So you also have, you also did at one point No Limits, and I thought of that the other day because there was an article about the students in the Corcoran graduating, not knowing how to present themselves, and they've decided to have a course about that. But you were way ahead of them. You had a course advising advising artists about presentation. Tell me something about
actually, it wasn't so much advising artists about presentation, but it was a kind of support group. It was a support group, which is interesting. At the time that I was leading it, I felt in Washington sometimes people didn't think that support was such, it wasn't, there was something like it was a little bit suspicious, you know, if you needed support, and yet everybody needs support, and artists particularly, and women artists particularly, and the kind of group that I had actually had women saying what their dreams were as artists, and also exploring where we got stuck and how we could not stay stuck.
You encouraged them. I mean, that's really very important to have somebody say, sure, that sounds like a good idea, you know, why not do that? You also have a connection. You were one of the so-called Ratner artists, the Ratner Museum, which is a wonderful place also for music, and Carl Banner is involved in giving concerts there, but you also were involved in showing your work there with a group of other artists. How did that come about?
Phil Ratner, when he started the Ratner Museum, I don't know when he started it, it has his work, but when he first opened that museum, which is in Bethesda, he became aware that he wanted to have a group of artists whose work was also inspired by the Old Testament, as most of his work is.
Yes, yeah.
And my work was not at the time, but he liked what he saw of my work, and he was just putting a group together, and he said, could you do work based on the Old Testament? I said, I don't know. So I actually looked into some I want to say folklore, some unusual stories that were written around the time of the Old Testament, which were inspiring to me. And then I was able to I did quite an extensive body of work on the Song of Songs after
So
that.
Montgomery County, with your salon, with the Ratner Museum, I mean, this is a cultural oasis. And I think it's become more important as people are going to the art walk in Bethesda. It used to be that all the action was at DuPont Circle. I think there's been a real shift. And it's been a great pleasure having you as a guest. It's very exciting that you have this New York show. And next time I'll be talking about a play that Studio Theater has mounted, Tom Stoppard's Rock and Roll. And while I was in New York, the only other show I saw besides Marilyn's show at Sarah's Gallery was the NYU's Gray Gallery. And then there'll be lots of film. So I'll see you next time on the art scene. This is Lila Snow, and thanks to our special guest, Marilyn Banner.